Digital Humanism, the Ethics Dimension. I would like to give this presentation in the frame of the eudhit project, the European Digital Humanism Initiative, and briefly introduce what digital humanism has to do with ethics. Now, from a more philosophical perspective, looking at the world in which we live, it should be clear we live in what philosophers call the post-digital world. That doesn't mean that our world is no longer digital. It actually means the opposite. We live in a world that is so digital that difference between a digital world and what is non-digital doesn't make much sense anymore. Anything from our private lives to how we work to what we do at leisure time, all of which has now digital elements, so that the digital is pervasive. And that naturally poses the question, is this a good life that we have in this digital world? And digital humanism, at least when we talk about the ethics dimension, also talks precisely about this, the question, what is a digital good life? Now, it should be clear that digital humanism is very much driven by risks of digital systems. It's a big concern of digital systems nowadays that there are many issues, from the loss of privacy, from the big influence of technology platforms, to the control and surveillance that these systems have of our daily lives, to, if you like, the question of government surveillance, the question of even AI singularity, a big AI that becomes so powerful that it's controlling humans. So all of these aspects pose risks, both from the societal perspective and, of course, from the more individual perspective, and that is really the ethics dimension of digital systems. So when we talk about this, that we also need to talk about the question, what is it that we would like to have instead of a situation where we are exposed to all of these risks? So that's the question of digital humanism and the good digital life. Now, ethics originally is the branch of philosophy that deals with moral principles. It's a branch of philosophy that answers the Kantian question, the question by Immanuel Kant, what should I do? And it's one of his famous questions where he implicitly defines what philosophy is about. So what should I do? Not in the sense of what do I need to do next or what should I technically do, but in the sense of the question, what should I do in my life? What's a good decision? If you want, ultimately, if on my deathbed, if I look back on my life, did I live a good life? So in that sense, what is a good thing to do? And this is also more or less how Aristotle looked at this question. He approached the question from this idea of how humans should best live and how to realize happiness in a good life. So that's really what's behind ethics. It's not just morality as defined by philosophers. It's the bigger question of how should we lead our lives? And the question of digital humanism, it's more about how should we live our lives with digital tools. So that's what we would like to discuss. And of course, digital humanism, being a humanism, very much focuses on humanistic ideals. When you look at the Vienna Manifesto on digital humanism, you'll find references to the human in several points. It's about shaping technologies in accordance with humans' values. It's about technology that supports humankind, and it's of course about humanistic ideals in the end. Now, when we talk about humanistic ideas, of course, we find ourselves in a position where we put the human in the center of interest. And that is something that is also a very old philosophical idea that dates back to Protagoras, basically more than 400 years before Christ, where the idea is that the human is at the center of our investigation, or is the measure of all things. Anthropos is the man that's put at the center of everything. And for digital humanism, this means that digital technology must be designed to empower people, to advance our democratic societies. And behind this is not just the idea of putting the single human in the middle, but to put also a societal dimension. So the fact that as humans, we live with other humans. And in that sense, digital humanism is about humans, but not just the individual. But without any doubt, humanism is indeed a humanism. So that also means that we understand ourselves in a tradition where there are other philosophical disciplines and histories actually that have put the human in the center. There are actually many versions of humanism. There is Renaissance humanism. There is the modern, still existing tradition of educational humanism. So all of these humanisms exist in parallel and have a long history. What I think is important for digital humanism is that the human is viewed as a subject that has personal responsibility, but basically didn't ask for being thrown into life as we find ourselves today. So we have to face reality, we have to face our environment, we have to take our own decisions. So from this position, there is a certain notion of autonomy also that comes with humanism. And of course, historically, humanism very much is connected to the age of enlightenment, to an age of questioning also authorities. So Kant defined enlightenment as man's emergence from self-incurred immaturity, basically saying that we have to question what is given to us. We don't have to believe anymore in just the state or just the authorities of the church. So we have to think for ourselves. And I think this is an element that's also important in digital humanism. We have to question things as they are and make our own decisions. But different from traditional humanism, digital humanism is not so much interested in the specificum humanum, as you might call it, what makes us human. So possible answers to this historically have been, it's our mind, it's rational thinking, or it's our language that makes us different from the animals. It's our consciousness, maybe it's our creativity, maybe it's the fact that we understand ourselves as being towards death, that we are destined to die. Rather than that, digital humanism is non-essentialist. It's not so much interested in defining the human being. The emphasis is both on the individual human and society, but also on the environment. In this sense, it's an anti-colonialist tradition that takes care, although the name humanism suggests only a focus on the human, also of societal and other aspects. And I think that's important because it's really philosophically a post-humanism. So what are some principles of digital humanism? We could summarize the manifesto in approximately 5 principles of digital humanism. One would be digital technology changes us and our lives. That's a simple stating the fact, basically, that digital technology influences us. It's changing us. It's changing people. It's changing people's perceptions. It's even culturally changing societies. It has a strong influence on who and what we are. Secondly, digital technology must protect humans and the environment, which is a normative statement about what digital humanism should do. It should protect being a human as humans, and as I just said, not just humans, but also humans in society and the environment. Thirdly, digital technology must strengthen democracy and society. So I think this is an important aspect where we clearly in digital humanism go beyond the human-centric perspective, where we argue that in order for technologies to be in line with digital humanism, there needs to be a democratic element. There needs to be debate about our technologies. There needs to be a clear understanding that we have a political choice about what these technologies should and shouldn't do. Fourth, precisely that, technology can be shaped. Technology is malleable. We can influence it. We can decide it. It's not something that is just an evolution from one generation of technology to the next. As a society and as individuals, we can design technology in ways that are in accordance with, for example, digital humanist principles. And fifth, there are still differences between machines and humans. Machines are not humans and humans are not machines. And this bears important consequences for how we look at people, how we look at the possibilities also of technologies, not judging them by some science fiction idea what they could be, looking at them as what they are, which is just technologies. Now, when we talk about ethics, very often then we talk about in digital systems ethical principles. So this idea of having certain principles guide us is very deeply rooted in philosophy. In philosophy, it's called principlism, when you come up with a number of principles. Historically, this goes back to medical history, where we had cruel pseudo-experiments in the past, for example, under the Nazi regime. And as a counter-movement to this historical development, there was this idea, let's establish certain principles, for example, in medical experiments. And these principles now play an important role also in digital ethics. So, for example, they have been suggested also as an ethics for artificial intelligence. And these principles include autonomy of person, non-maleficence, so technologies should not do harm. They should be beneficent in the sense that they should be developed with a clear idea of how they can help, and with a certain notion of justice or fairness, so they should do fairness to people. In AI, there is often a fifth principle that is mentioned, which is explainability, that we should understand what these systems are doing to us. And that is an important set of principles that has found its way also into AI regulation, for example, and that is practically nowadays also used when people evaluate their systems, for example, and study what the system does. Now, in this list of the 5 principles, there was this one aspect where I said there is a difference between humans and machines. And what does this mean in practice from the point of view of digital humanism? It also means that there may be limits to digital technologies in principles. Maybe there are points where we don't want to use digital technologies because these topics or these areas are so fundamentally human. They are so fundamentally related to how we define ourselves as humans that maybe we want not to use digital technology in these areas. So that could be things like decisions over life and death. That could be decisions that concern our children, where love comes in. So the truly important matters are probably those where we should particularly be careful when employing digital systems. And finally, there is one ethical and philosophical point that I believe is also important to make. Technology in the end should support humans. Technology should be developed so as to empower people rather than replace people and their parts. And often when we talk about the future of digital technologies, there are visions of the enhanced human, of the transhuman even. And I think it's fair to say that as digital humanists, we do not believe in this transhumanism. We believe in that the people as we are today, we are the best people there are. We are not necessarily needy of further improvements of a digital kind. Now, what does this mean in practice? How can we put these ethical principles into practice? How do we move from principles to practice? Let's first say that, of course, what sounds as abstract principles in practice are actually also business topics that we need to address. Why? Because these ethical issues, they pose significant business risks. This could be innovation risks, can be risks of the technology. There are, of course, security concerns. All of these issues, such as violations of privacy or surveillance, pose significant public relation risks. And of course, nowadays also regulatory and legal risks. So companies need to practically deal with those issues. On the other hand, AI systems will always make decisions. So we cannot avoid the fact that systems make decisions, and they may also make mistakes, because never are all decisions completely clear-cut. There may always be an intermediate area where we have to navigate, a certain uncertainty. And then the question arises, what do we do with our decisions? So, for example, we're predicting people's tendency to be a criminal. Should we put everybody in jail just because we think there is a certain risk as people might commit a crime? Or should we rather not put them in jail and let a potential criminal free in our society? So these are the decisions that whenever it comes to an AI system, to a digital system that makes a decision, we will always have to make a decision. And if we do not take this decision consciously, then implicitly it will be given by the system. What I'm trying to say here is that fairness of digital system is something that's truly important, but it's not easy. We will always make certain mistakes, and then we can give different answers to what fairness is. And many people have talked about this, and probably there's not just one answer. So despite the fact that we have a principle of fairness, it doesn't necessarily follow that we can give one clear answer to how we should build a system. Maybe a system in the insurance area has a different idea about fairness than a system that grants access to a university based on some characteristics or based on some test results. So fairness is something, for example, that we have to debate, where we have to maybe discuss what do we actually mean and not just write down a formal answer. So in this sense, fairness, like all the other principles, also asks for a debate, and that is what digital humanism is trying to do. Is trying to have these debates and discuss the pros and cons of certain views of certain fairness measures. Now, of course, in the last 10 years or so, people have investigated many of the issues. Fairness is one example. Another one is bias in systems, so tendencies to decide for one or the other. Or there are issues of how do we actually control security and safety of these systems. And people have come up with a lot of ideas. The idea of privacy-preserving machine learning has developed into a whole field of machine learning. Explainable artificial intelligence is another area where people are proposing a lot of ideas and methods. So these have become huge fields. And now we are in a situation where actually we can do a lot. We can make much better algorithms. We can improve our data sets. We can, of course, also inform people about what's happening in AI systems. So we have a whole set of tools and algorithms and methods then we can choose. And this is still under development, so the field is moving forward. But it is not the case that we can just have, one set of principles or one algorithm that does everything. Unfortunately, we still need to discuss these things and these choices. What should we use for which systems? These, we believe, need to be informed by digital humanism. These tools can be applied in the design phase when we're building a system. They can be applied in the test phase. And there are also tools that we can use later when a system is ready. Maybe when it has a bias, we could still inform people. So we have choices both at the design level, at the, let's say, testing level, but then also on the information level. Knowing the advantages and disadvantages of certain tools is important in order to build systems that are aligned with digital humanism. Let me make one final point, which is a bit more philosophical again, and that is the question: the degree to which users should keep the autonomy about their system is an important question, especially in digital humanism. We have a tendency in digital humanism to put the human in the center, so we believe humans should have a choice, meaning that we do not necessarily need systems that tell us what to do or prescribe what to do. So, for example, when there are e-scooters that decide to have, for example, that they cannot break the law in a pedestrian zone, the question is, should we have those? Should we have digital systems that constrain our action so much that we cannot violate the rules? Or should we, as people, always have the autonomy to decide for ourselves? These are the kind of questions that we're asking. They need to be discussed in context. These are, in the end, also political questions. We need to discuss them in our societies and decide what we want to have, hopefully in a democratic way, and hopefully deciding for the better of society. But still, we can give some general recommendations in digital humanism. One would be, we need solutions that preserve human dignity. So this is about humans, their freedom and their own determination. As we are evolving digital systems, this is a tricky question because there are more and more systems actually moving into areas where we didn't have digital systems. such as in healthcare, for example, such as in elderly care. And we need to make sure that we preserve human dignity, especially those where we are caring for those in need. There should be, as I already mentioned, a focus on autonomy, on human autonomy. Digital technologies should empower people, not disempower them by taking decisions away from them. They should be fair, again, with a difficult question of what fairness means in a sort of context of an application. And I think also there is an element of care that we need to understand, that digital technology should preserve and expand also our social and cultural achievements. It's not just about optimization, not everything is about efficiency. It's in the end also about caring people and making sure that digital systems are aligned with this notion of caring for each other. In the end, digital humanism sends a positive message. It's the belief that technology is not destiny. We can design these systems, we can have an influence. We shouldn't take it as a given, and as a democratic group of people, we should jointly decide in which direction to move. That's basically the basic of ethics of digital humanism. If you want to learn more, contact us or have a look at our webpage at eudhit.eu. We are here to help, and we offer guidance and experts and events that support digital humanism in general, but also the ethics of digital humanism as we have. Thank you very much.